Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a, shall we say, special channel? It's called White Rabbit, and it is very aptly named as it is a collection of rabbit trail videos talking about all the various New World Order conspiracy theories, and I found one of their videos on evolution. Now, he speaks incredibly slowly, so I'm going to speed it up a bit. If you normally watch my videos at 1.5 times speed, you should still not have any problem understanding him, but if you might run into difficulties if you go any quicker than that. Also, he takes nearly 3 minutes just to say the topic of this video is evolution, so fair warning, I will probably be skipping a lot of his video. As always, link is in the description if you want to subject yourself to that kind of torture. And even after speeding him up, his video is long enough that we'll still have to take it in 2 parts. So let's see what the New World Order thinks of evolution.
Folks, the greatest lie ever told to all of us is that evolution is scientific fact. It is not. It is a belief. It is a fundamental religious belief. And in this video, I'm going to prove that to you without a shadow of a doubt.
Well, I look forward to hearing how the change in allele frequencies in a population over successive generations is a religion rather than just something that happens.
Now, it is important to realize that the main opposition against evolution comes from people of faith, typically people who interpret the Bible literally. The problem with this is that our society has conditioned us to believe that anyone who literally interprets the Bible is a nut and is not to be taken seriously.
Not necessarily. I mean, certain people like Matt Powell, Kent Hovind, Ken Ham, and their ilk are definitely not to be taken seriously, but their followers? I have personally known several creationists over the years. For the most part, they are just normal people. In fact, I'd say that the majority of them are mostly like your ordinary everyday evolution-accepting people. They don't really care about it that much, and they don't change how they live their day-to-day lives based on their opinions of how life developed. I've even run into situations where it isn't even a religious thing, it's just a lack of understanding, but those are probably in the minority.
Ultimately, this results in an added, additional mental roadblock for one to get past in order to even hear the opposing arguments.
I actually kind of agree with that. If you prejudge someone based on one of their beliefs, then you are more likely to dismiss them out of hand when considering their perspective. And I try to keep this in mind when I make my videos. A great example is my experience with Matt Powell. I used to feel sorry for him, having been raised in such a sheltered environment and never being exposed to any real arguments against creationism. I assumed that he was honest and honestly ignorant. But the more content I watched with him in it, the more it became clear that he is a petty, manipulative, vindictive liar who at this point deserves to be dismissed out of hand. Now, just for reference, here's a clip of him going unhinged on one of his, I hesitate to use the word friend here, but acquaintance maybe? But that's off topic a bit. Back to you, White Rabbit.
For this reason, I will not be referencing the Bible at all throughout this video.
Yay! And now I'm skipping a bunch because at this point he takes almost 2 minutes just to say the reason they push evolution is because the one world government needs a one world religion, and then he explains that forcing religion on people and controlling the media are ineffective at convincing people to believe what you want them to believe, but replacing their religion with something factual is more effective, which is kind of telling actually if you think about it.
So then we come to the third option, and that is convincing people that their religion is wrong, while simultaneously pushing your religion as not being characteristic of a religion at all.
Which might be said to be the case if almost everybody who specifically promotes evolution weren't doing so while simultaneously doing their best to make it clear that evolution is not a threat to your religion. I point out all the time that there are evolution-accepting scientists from many different religions. In the classroom, it might be a bit different, but I'd be willing to bet that the majority of the time, religion doesn't even come into play. And when it does, I would wager that it's either the student bringing it up, or the teacher is promoting some form of creationism rather than explaining why evolution dismantles religion.
The reason this would be the most effective way to approach this is by eliminating any debate whatsoever.
Which it obviously has done. I mean, here we are 160 years after Origin of the Species was published, and there's no debate whatsoever. Everyone just mindlessly accepts evolution. That's why my channel can exist in its current form, because no creationists ever put out any content for me to rebut, as creationists don't even exist. Right?
Think about it. If your religion contradicts fact, it will only be a matter of time until people stop believing.
Okay, fair point, I'll grant you that one. Creationism does contradict fact. And it has been slowly shrinking over the years, despite the denominations which are more partial to creationism having higher birth rates. I mean, it's not evolution's fault that creationists refuse to update their belief system to account for new data, but certainly the gradual shrinking of the creationist movement can at least be partially blamed on this refusal to accept new data.
Now, it is important to understand that evolution did not stem from Darwin. Evolution actually stems from naturalism, or a form thereof. Now, the debate between naturalism being a religion or a philosophy is still widely debated.
I mean, not really. The graphic you chose to put up for this point actually shows pretty clearly how naturalism is not a religion, as its Venn diagram can intersect with spirituality, and there are people of many different religions who also look at the world through a naturalist lens. This is how people can remain religious and still be scientists. They believe in their religion, but they assume that whatever creative power might be working on the universe does it through naturalistic processes. If naturalism were itself a religion, this would not be possible.
But I just wanted to bring this up for you to realize that it wasn't so much science that created evolution and a theory thereof, but the worldview of a few, which likely led to its acceptance and popularity.
The worldview he's talking about here is the worldview of trying to figure out how the world works without resorting to magical explanations. You know, the only worldview that has ever given us any scientific progress? Now, yes, there were and are religious scientists. Some of our greatest advances were made by people of religion. But these people were not satisfied with the explanation that God did it. They wanted to understand how God did it. And in order to do that, you have to explore naturalistic explanations. They saw naturalism as complementary to the religion rather than antithetical.
Let's look at the word religion. The first definition of religion that you will find states that it is a set of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe.
Well, it depends on which dictionary you go to as to whether or not that is the first one. If you just ask Google to define it, you get the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods. If you go to Merriam-Webster or Oxford, you get, under the first definition, the state of a religious. Which, that sentence doesn't really make sense to me, but that's the first definition, followed immediately by the service and worship of God or the supernatural, and commitment or devotion to religious faith or observance. Cambridge Dictionary has it as being the belief in and worship of a god or gods, or any such system of belief and worship. Finally, we get to dictionary.com, where we get the definition that matches yours. Sure, though, dictionary.com might be someone's first thought when looking things up, so let's just read through and make sure it matches what you said. A set of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe, ... And that's where you ended it with an ellipsis, indicating that there was more of the definition that you were leaving out. So continuing on, especially when considered as the creation of a superhuman agency or agencies, usually involving devotional and ritual observances, and often containing a moral code governing the conduct of human affairs. I wonder why you left that part out. Could it possibly be because you recognize that this definition does not fit with evolution at all? I mean, I'd expect you to jump down to something like Google's third definition, which is a pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes supreme importance, which for most people still doesn't fit, but at least you'd have an argument of sorts there. But that definition is more like an intense hobby, so it doesn't really fit what you're trying to claim, with evolution being used to supplant traditional religions, because you can't replace the feeling of community you might get at church with a passion for studying evolutionary biology, for the simple reason that they are not even in the same category as each other.
The second definition is a specific fundamental set of beliefs and practices generally agreed upon by a number of persons.
Yep, and that definition requires the beliefs and practices in order to count as a religion. Otherwise, everything that people can largely agree on would be considered a religion, and the word religion would thus become meaningless. Do you believe the sky is blue? Then you're a member of the blue sky religion. Is the sun hot? Religion. Water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius at sea level? Religion! That's why the practices part is there. We all believe the same thing, and so we do these certain things in accordance with that belief. That's what makes it a religion. Problem is, there are no practices that are a part of a belief in evolution. There are some behaviors that are sometimes shared among certain demographics of people who accept evolution, but you'll not find anyone condemning people in different evolution-accepting groups of not being true evolution acceptors because they don't have the same practices as we do. Because evolution's not a religion, plain and simple.
The third definition is the body of persons adhering to a particular set of beliefs and practices.
Just go ahead and rewind the video a little bit so you can repeat what I said to the last point. It's the combination of beliefs and practices that make it count as a religion.
And the last definition I'll give you is probably the most important. Something one believes in and follows devotedly. A point or matter of ethics or consciousness.
Firstly, conscience, not consciousness. And while I would agree that the people promoting evolution are often very vehement about it, it is not a matter of devotion. I am not devoted to religion. It is a matter of wanting scientific fact taught properly in schools and keeping religion out of the science classroom. Now, this does not mean that science class should be promoting atheism. It just means that they need to discuss actual science. The kids can get religious instruction at home, or preferably, in my opinion, they can have a class that teaches about all the different world religions without emphasizing the truth of one over the others. If you believe that your religion is the one true religion, then an unbiased examination of several religions should lead to your true religion. If you feel that your kids need to be sheltered from exposure to other religions in order to keep them believing in yours, then that just shows a lack of confidence in your religion's ability to actually come out on top when presented with competing views. Now back to evolution. Even vocal proponents of evolution, such as myself, live the majority of their lives without evolution playing any major role. There are very, very few decisions I make that are affected by my acceptance of evolution, and the ones that are made with evolution in mind are usually directly related to my channel.
So basically, all a religion is a particular worldview that people subscribe to, which helps to explain the origin of the universe and is followed devotedly.
And which has specific practices associated with it. You skip that bit because it's not applicable and you know it.
So now let's look at the definition of science. The definition of the word science clearly states that it is a systematic knowledge of the physical or material world gained through observation and experimentation.
Yes, we observe something and perform experiments to see if our observations were correct, observe the outcome of these experiments, and repeat the process ad infinitum. And that's the basic scientific process.
That is crucial to understanding why evolution at its core is a belief and not a science. Because in order to qualify as science, it has to be knowledge that is gained through observation and experimentation.
Ah, yes, ye old argument from Were You There? I've missed you. No, wait, I haven't missed you. It seems I deal with you every week.
The funny thing about evolution is that even if a scientific experimentation and observation was performed, which proved its possibility, still would not be proof of it having occurred.
By gum, you're right. Good thing we've observed it happening then, and we've made it happen in lab settings. And we observe the evolutionary patterns in the genes of all the organisms whose genomes we have sequenced thus far, and we observe the progression of fossils in the fossil record, etc., etc.
But only that it theoretically could have occurred, and there's a big distinction between the two. See, in order for evolution on a larger scale to be able to explain the origin of life, as it claims to do, it would have had to have been observed.
Not really. For the sake of time, I'm not going to correct his use of the word proof, which isn't really applicable, so whenever he says proof, just mentally swap it out with demonstrate or something similar to that. So, in order to demonstrate that evolution has happened, we do not need to have seen the whole process. We just need to demonstrate that it can and does happen, and then see if the data we collect on organisms from the past matches up with what is predicted if we assume evolution to be correct. We have demonstrated that it can and does happen, with numerous experiments in lab settings, and we have seen it happen in the wild. And when we look at organisms from the past, we find that they match up exactly with what we would expect if evolution were true.
Now, if we look at the definition of evolution, we can see that evolution is clearly defined as the gradual development of something, especially from a simple to a more complex form.
Oh my, the dishonesty runs deep in this one. So that definition is a paraphrase that is found in an answer on Quora to the question, what does the term evolution refer to? Important to note here that even in this Quora answer, the person went on to give a separate definition of evolution for biology, of change in the genetic composition of a population during successive generations, often resulting in the development of a new species. The mechanisms of evolution include natural selection acting on the genetic variation among individuals, mutation, migration, and genetic drift. But then if we click the link that this answer provided for reference, definitions, we get the freedictionary.com's definition, which is a gradual process in which something changes into a different and usually more complex or better form. I was curious why you felt the need to switch dictionaries on me, so I looked it up on dictionary.com and found it to be any process of formation or growth, development, which obviously doesn't refer to biological evolution, but then when it does get to biology, it specifies change in the gene pool of a population from generation to generation by such processes as mutation, natural selection, and genetic drift. I wonder if you're going to address that definition, as all of these processes have been directly observed. My guess is no.
Folks, in order for something to become more complex, you need to introduce new information.
Not true. In order to be complex, something just has to be complicated. Complexity is not a function of information. If I randomly bash the keyboard for 20 minutes, there will be a very complex string of characters on the screen, but there will be essentially no information. And if we get back to the biological definition of evolution, complexity doesn't play a part in it. Certainly, evolution predicts that life will tend toward complexity as time goes on, but it is not an integral part of the theory in general. Evolution is just the change in gene frequencies in a population over generations. It could be more complex, it could be less complex. It doesn't matter. Both are evolution. But the mechanisms through which these genes change frequency naturally pushes the changes toward greater complexity rather than simplicity. For instance, let's do a thought experiment with regards to the multicellular algae experiment. A filter feeder is introduced to a colony of single-celled algae. The filter feeder is unable to eat the algae that are greater than a specific size. The algae develop multicellularity as a defense mechanism. Several small cells bound together are just as inedible as one large cell. This much is not hypothetical, it has happened. But now let's hypothesize about a potential future. The filter feeder will, in this new multicellular world, have a greater survival advantage if it develops a way to feed on the new, larger algae organism. There are still single-celled algae for the filter feeder to eat, but there are less of them. Should one of the filter feeders develop a way to eat the larger algae, that one will be more successful at reproducing. But now the pressure is back on the algae to grow larger still, which will then pressure the filter feeders to feed on the even larger algae, etc., etc. The increase in complexity is not itself a property of evolution, it is just one of the side effects of the evolutionary processes.
Now, for the sake of simplicity, just realize that in order for evolution to even be possible, evolutionists claim that this new information is introduced through mutations.
Yes, that is one of the mechanisms of evolution. Not the only one, but definitely one of them.
Now, common sense suggests that mutations are usually negative things.
And when discussing complicated scientific processes, we should all rely on our common sense intuitions rather than looking at the data. Though in this case you're actually not far off. There are generally more negative mutations than positive ones, but natural selection works in conjunction with mutations to weed out the bad ones and promote the success of the good ones. And whether a mutation is beneficial or detrimental is determined almost entirely by the environment in which the mutated organism is found. A mutation for a thicker coat of fur, for instance, could be beneficial for an Arctic fox, but would not be quite so helpful for an animal living in a tropical rainforest.
Evolutionists acknowledge that each tiny bit of new information is extraordinarily rare. Therefore, they say that's why it takes millions and millions, and even billions of years to happen on a noticeable scale.
I mean, yeah, beneficial mutations are rare, and life has been around on Earth for about 3 billion years. And multicellularity didn't evolve until about 600 million years ago. And that makes sense. Single-celled organisms are by far the most diverse group of organisms on the planet. Estimates place the number of microbe species on the planet at about 1 trillion, which completely dwarfs the 8.7 million estimated macroorganism species. So when we're looking at all of the species on the planet, micro and macro, the macro make up about 0.00087% of the species. And that's not even looking at how many individual organisms there are. This is exactly what you would expect when you consider how much longer single-celled organisms had to evolve, combined with how much easier evolution is for single-celled organisms given how quickly they reproduce.
Evolutionists depend on mutations to generate new information in their model. That part of the model is a huge problem. The stubborn fact is that no instance of mutation making information has ever been confirmed, not even in the tiniest increment.
No, you're right. Duplication events never happen. Except for when they do, which is quite frequently. And let's not forget the insertion mutations. and endogenous retroviruses, which are areas of our genome that have genetic leftovers from a past event where a virus inserted its genetic code into our genome. Endogenous retroviruses make up about 5 to 8% of our genome, and it is literally the result of a virus inserting new information into our genome. And this is where it becomes important to explain what you mean by information anyway, because we know that genetic material can be inserted into our DNA. That is not in question. Is information just a measure of how much DNA there is? Because an insertion mutation is capable of completely breaking a gene, turning functional genetic material into dormant or even detrimental genetic material. It began with the addition of genetic material, but is that new information? Does the addition of genetic material here count as a loss of information since it broke a gene? I don't think information is a good metric to use here. It's far too nebulous a concept to actually be useful.
Never, not once. There is not a single field observation or lab finding. The only thing that they've been able to find is a mutation which recombines existing information.
Okay, I was planning on skipping this part because it is rather redundant, but I just couldn't resist showing you this little graphic. In this section where he is claiming that we have never, ever, not in a million years confirmed, it just doesn't happen, we've never seen new information added in the lab or in the wild, he then scrolls past the different types of mutation, one of which, in his own video, says insertion. What do you think an insertion is, if not inserting new information? Okay, now I'm skipping ahead.
Now at this point, many of you are probably asking yourselves, what about the fossil record? To you I say, what fossil record?
How about this record, showing the development of modern whales from their primitive land-dwelling ancestors? Or this record, showing the development of modern horses from their smaller ancestors with more toes? Or this one, showing the development of the hominids? There's plenty of evidence in the fossil record for evolution, and with all of this evidence here, it is still one of the weakest pieces of evidence for evolution. If we had 0 fossils, we would still have the theory of evolution.
There is no such thing as a fossil record. All there is a bunch of bones and fossils in the dirt.
Okay, well you seem to be quite fond of using the dictionary as part of your argument when defining your terms, so let's see what the dictionary has to say about a record. It is a thing constituting a piece of evidence about the past, especially an account of an act or occurrence kept in writing or some other permanent form. So at its most basic, a record is just a thing that contains information about the past. So the existence of fossils, and the fact that fossils can even be identified as fossils, means that there is a fossil record. Whether that record demonstrates evolution or creation is another matter, but the fact that they are there means that the fossil record exists by definition.
In reality, all of these bones and fossils actually help to disprove evolution.
So you're saying that the record of these fossils doesn't support evolution? That's a neat trick if there's no fossil record.
And substantially, I might add. Darwin predicted the fossil record would present a smooth and gradual transition from one kind of organism to another.
He may have, he may not have. Doesn't really matter for this point. We do have several transitions. But here I would like to once again examine what you are showing on your screen. That is not a quote from Charles Darwin. That is a quote from Dr. Colin Patterson and was written in a 1979 letter to a creationist who was asking him why he didn't use a picture of a transitional fossil in his book titled Evolution. He went on to explain that we can never be sure that any one specific species was ever actually the ancestor of any other specific species, which is true. It's possible that there were other species alive at the same time that were the actual ancestors, but that we are unaware of because of how spotty the fossil record is. So it's a paleontologist being super cautious in his language, that's all. But here you are, presenting it as if it's a quote from Darwin, which is kind of funny because if it were from Darwin, I wouldn't need to explain the whole not sure if a species actually was an ancestor of a different species thing. I could have just said, yeah, there weren't any that we knew about then, but we have them now. So it's actually easier to rebut the way that you presented it than if you were to actually give it its proper attribution. Now next he brings up the fact that infinitesimally small amounts of carbon-14 can be found in minerals and fossils that have been dated to be millions and even billions of years old. The whole argument is based on a misunderstanding of the half-life concept, because if you're cutting the amount of C14 in half every 5,700 years, the amount of C14 left over will never dwindle down to 0. And that's not to mention the processes that are known to leave trace contamination of C14 in certain materials. For instance, in diamonds, radiation from nearby radioactive mineral deposits can cause the conversion of nitrogen impurities into C14. So I'm skipping the C14 part of his video.
So this brings us to our next topic. What about all the different dating methods that they have used to conclude that these fossils are millions of years old.
Yeah, what about them? Because it is always preferable to date a specimen with several different methods to see if they agree with each other. If several different and independent dating methods all come to the same conclusion about the age of a specimen, then it's a pretty good bet that those dating methods were accurate.
Well, the first thing that you need to keep in mind is that these dating methods that they speak of, like carbon dating, potassium-argon dating, and so on and so forth, are not actually used to age fossils.
Correct. The fossils themselves are not the leftover bones of the animal that left them. They are essentially a mineralized casting of the bones of the animal that left them. So you can't radiometrically date them directly, as that will give you an age for the minerals that replace the bones, which will probably not line up with the age of the specimen itself.
The so-called geologic column is what is used to date fossils. The funny thing is, fossils are used to date the geological column, which is obviously circular reasoning and doesn't make any sense.
Didn't you just finish saying that the radiometric dating methods aren't used directly on the fossils? What did you think they were used on, if not the fossils or the rocks surrounding the fossils? Yes, there are some fossils we use as index fossils. Index fossils are fossils that have 4 characteristics. They must be distinctive, widespread, abundant, and limited in geologic time. A good example is the trilobite. If you find a trilobite, you're looking at Paleozoic rock, as that is the only time period that the trilobites lived in. The index fossils themselves are not used as a tool for dating the rock. Rather, they are an indicator of the age range for the rock in which they are found. Absolute dating methods would then be used to narrow down the range. If you want a more in-depth look at index fossils, check out Jackson Wheat's video on them. That's it for this video. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Simahai. That person, who says, excuse me, but your title is a quote from an atheist college professor. Tim O'Leary was a leader in the 60s drug movement and died of an overdose of heroin. It was used by many an atheist mass murderer as well. Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, and so on. I'm pretty sure the Gestapo would like what you have to say as well. For reference, this was on my Pseudoscience Uprising video, which was titled, If It Feels Good, It Must Be True. First and foremost, if you actually watched my video and came away thinking that the title wasn't sarcastically making fun of the theme of the Discovery Institute's video, that's on you. Second, I think you got the name a bit wrong. Tim O'Leary is a neurologist at Cambridge University, is still alive, and does not look old enough to have been a leader in the drug movement in the 60s. There's also a Tim O'Leary that's an actor that hasn't been in anything that I've ever heard of, but IMDb lists him as being known for Hatchback. Now, there was a university professor named Timothy Leary who promoted the use of psychedelic drugs for therapy. Could that be the one that you're talking about? Couldn't be, because he died of cancer, not a heroin overdose. Now, I think the quote you're actually thinking of is, if it feels good, do it, which is not the same thing at all. And once again, if you actually watch the video, you'll see that I was criticizing the Discovery Institute's use of the argument from consequences, where they don't like the ideas that a materialist view of the world might lead to, so they conclude that materialism must be wrong because they don't like some of its potential conclusions. So remember to follow me on social media and support me on Patreon. Our holiday fundraiser, as of this recording, is just about halfway to our goal, so if you haven't given yet, what are you waiting for? Go give some money to a good cause. See you next time! Oh, we're halfway there. Oh, living on a prayer.